Dusty's empty wagon. The sunset bled across the western sky, painting the wheat fields in hues of orange and purple. Dusty Willowbrook sat on his porch swing, the wornwood creaking a mournful tune with each gentle push of his boot. He watched the light fade, the colors deepening into the indigo of twilight. It was a beautiful sight, a sight Martha had loved. He could almost hear her soft sigh beside him, feel the warmth of her hand in his. Martha. Just the name was enough to prick his eyes with unshed tears. 5 years. 5 years since the fever took her, leaving him alone with the farm, the memories, and a hollow ache in his chest that seemed to grow with each passing year. He sighed, the sound lost in the rustling leaves of the ancient oak tree that stood sentinel beside the house. He hadn't touched the porch swing since her passing. Not really. It had become a monument to her, a constant reminder of what he had lost. Tonight, though the loneliness was a palpable thing, a heavy weight pressing down on him, he needed something. The next morning dawned bright and unforgiving. The sun beat down on Dusty's back as he wrestled with a stubborn section of fence. The wire, rusted and brittle, snapped in his gloved hand, sending a sharp sting through his palm. He swore under his breath, a rare occurrence for him. He straightened, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his forearm. The farm was slowly but surely winning. Weeds choked the rows of corn, the barn roof sagged precariously, and the fields felt empty. He was one man, and this was a job for 2, maybe 3. Martha had been a tireless worker, strong and capable. He missed her help, her sharp wit, her unwavering belief in him, even when he doubted himself. He thought of the empty wagon in the barn, the one they used to haul hay. He hadn't hitched a team to it in years. It sat there, gathering dust, a symbol of his own stagnant existence. He was stuck, mired in the past, unable to move forward. Lunch was a meager affair, a cold biscuit and a slice of cheese eaten standing up in the barn. He flicked through an old newspaper he'd found tucked away in a corner, mostly advertisements and notices from years gone by. His gaze snagged on a small, faded advertisement, Lonely Hearts Seeking Companionship. Right to, followed by a post office box in Chicago. He scoffed. Mail-order brides. A relic of a bygone era. Desperate measures for desperate men. Still, the thought lingered, a tiny seed planted in the fertile ground of his loneliness. He pictured a woman, any woman, sharing his meals, tending the garden, filling the empty spaces in the house. He quickly dismissed the notion as foolish. He was too old, too worn, and the farm. Well, the farm wasn't exactly a prize. Who would want him? But the seed had been planted. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon once more, painting the sky in shades of longing, Dusty found himself back on the porch swing. He wasn't thinking of Martha this time. Not entirely. He was thinking of that advertisement, of the possibility, however remote, of a different kind of sunset, one shared with someone new. A surprise in the wagon. Dusty Willowbrook hooked the last pail of milk onto the yoke, the cool metal biting at his calloused hands. The pre-dawn air held a promise of heat, the kind that baked the fields to brittle straw by late afternoon. He considered leaving the pumpkins in the west field another week. He'd been putting it off, truth be told. The thought of bartering them, of hearing the townsfolk haggle over a few cents, just felt tiresome. He straightened, his back protesting with a familiar groan, and headed towards the wagon. He'd hitch up Bess and be halfway to town before the sun fully crested the horizon. Maybe he'd even try that new coffee blend Millie was raving about at the general store. A small change. That's all he needed. He nearly tripped over the figure curled up on a wagon bed beneath a patchwork quilt. Dusty froze, heart hammering against his ribs. Had some drifter decided to make his wagon a temporary bed? He cautiously approached, his hand instinctively reaching for the wrench he kept tucked under the seat. Then he saw her face, framed by a cascade of auburn curls. A woman slept soundly, her breath soft and even. She looked young, younger than he expected. He hadn't really pictured her, not beyond the faded photograph and the carefully penned letters. Clara May Bloom. His bride. Panic clawed at his throat. What in tarnation? He cleared his throat, trying for a gentle tone that came out more like a rusty hinge. Miss Bloom, her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a summer sky after a rainstorm. She blinked, confusion clouding her features before dawning recognition sparked within them. She sat up abruptly, the quilt slipping from her shoulders. Mr. Willowbrook? Oh dear, I must have dozed off. She smoothed down her rumpled dress, a simple calico print that spoke of practicality rather than frills. I'm so sorry. The stage, well, it wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow. Tomorrow? Dusty echoed, still trying to process the unexpected arrival. But, the letter said. The driver, Clara explained, a sheepish grin tugging at her lips, said he was making up time. Something about a runaway pig delaying him on the previous route. He insisted on dropping me off at the Willowbrook farm, said it was only a slight detour. I didn't want to be any trouble, so I told him I knew where it was, and I'd wait in the wagon. She looked around, her expression turning hopeful. I hope I haven't caused any inconvenience. Inconvenience? His carefully ordered life had just been upended by a runaway pig and an early arrival. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. No, he managed. No inconvenience. Just unexpected. From the edge of the property, behind the ancient oak tree, Martha Mattie Jenkins watched the scene unfold. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. The stranger, the rumpled quilt, Dusty's bewildered expression. She clucked her tongue, a mixture of disapproval and excitement bubbling within her. This was better than any dime novel. She straightened her bonnet and hurried towards town, the news already forming on her lips. Dusty Willowbrook had a visitor, and she was no doubt about to become the talk of the town. Clara, oblivious to Maddie's scrutiny, hopped down from the wagon, her movements surprisingly graceful. I hope you don't mind, she said, her voice laced with a hint of nervousness, but I made myself some coffee. I found a pot and some grounds in the cabin. She gestured towards the small, weather-beaten farmhouse. I hope that was all right. Dusty stared at her, a strange mix of apprehension and curiosity swirling within him. This woman, this Clara, was nothing like he'd imagined. Bold, perhaps, a little impulsive, certainly not the shy, retiring type he'd expected from the letters. He swallowed hard. All right, he repeated, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. Yes, that's all right. He was still rooted to the spot, unsure what to do next. He looked from Clara to the farmhouse, then back again. The pumpkins could wait. Millie's coffee could wait. Everything, it seemed, would have to wait. He just hoped he was ready for what came next. Clara's helping hand. Dusty nearly choked on his coffee. Clara May Bloom, his mail-order bride, was supposed to arrive next Tuesday. Not today, not before he'd even managed to fix the porch swing. Yet, there she was, standing in his kitchen like a misplaced sunflower, a shy smile playing on her lips. I hope I didn't startle you, Mr. Willowbrook, she said, her voice a soft melody that somehow eased the chaos in his brain. Dusty, he corrected, still reeling. Call me Dusty. And you certainly did startle me, Miss Bloom. I mean, Clara. He gestured vaguely at the cluttered table. Coffee. She nodded, and as he poured, he noticed the way she took in the room, not with judgment, but with a quiet assessment. He felt a strange sense of scrutiny, but not in an unpleasant way. It was like she was cataloging everything, already planning how to make it better. The morning passed in a blur of hesitant conversation and shared chores. Dusty, still flustered, tried to keep her out of the way, muttering about dangerous machinery and the general unpleasantness of mucking out the stables. But Clara, with a gentle persistence, found her way into every task. She knew how to properly hold a chicken, coaxing eggs with a soft clucking sound he'd never mastered. She tightened loose bolts on the hay baler with a practiced hand, a tool belt appearing seemingly out of nowhere from her small satchel. My pa had a farm, she explained, her cheeks flushed with exertion. I learned a thing or two. Dusty, humbled and slightly bewildered, watched her work. He'd expected a delicate flower, a woman who would need constant care. Instead, he'd gotten a force of nature. By midday, the stables were cleaner than they'd been in months, and the chickens were laying like they were getting paid overtime. Clara then turned her attention to the garden, a patch of overgrown weeds and withered vegetables that Dusty had long neglected. "Lord have mercy," she murmured, surveying the scene. "This poor soil is begging for some love." And love she gave it. With a borrowed hoe and a tireless spirit, she cleared the weeds, tilled the soil, and even managed to salvage a few struggling tomato plants. Dusty, initially hesitant to let her exert herself, found himself captivated by her energy. He fetched water, offered advice, which she politely ignored, and generally tried to stay out of her way. He'd forgotten the satisfaction of working alongside someone, of sharing the burden and the reward. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they finally stopped, both covered in dirt and sweat. Clara's face was radiant, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. "There," she said, wiping her brow. "It's a start." Dusty, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in years, simply nodded. "It's beautiful, Clara." They ate supper on the porch, a simple meal of beans and cornbread that tasted like a feast. As they ate, they talked. Clara told him about her life in Ohio, about her pa's farm, her love for baking, and her dreams of starting a family. Dusty, in turn, shared stories about his late wife, Sarah, about the joys and hardships of farming, and about the loneliness that had settled in his bones after her passing. He expected Clara to be uncomfortable, to shy away from the memories of Sarah. But she listened with an open heart, her eyes filled with empathy. When he finished, she simply reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman, Dusty," she said softly. "She'll never be forgotten." A wave of warmth washed over him, a feeling of connection that he hadn't anticipated. He found himself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Clara laughed with him, her bright smile filling the evening air. As the moon climbed high in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, Dusty knew that something had shifted. Clara May Bloom was not the delicate flower he had imagined. She was strong, capable, and kind. And despite the unexpected circumstances of her arrival, he had a feeling that she might just be the helping hand he desperately needed. He just hoped he could offer her the life she deserved. The thought of Jedediah arriving next Tuesday brought an unexpected pang of unease. He would have to let her know she could still change her mind. A shadow from the city. Dusty Willowbrook hadn't expected Clara back so soon. He'd barely finished unharnessing the horses when she materialized from the barn, a smudge of hay dust on her cheek and a sheepish look in her eyes. "Dusty, I felt awful. I shouldn't have left. Are you still?" Before she could finish, the clatter of hooves on the dusty road announced an arrival. Not just any arrival, either. A gleaming black carriage, pulled by two matched bays with braided manes and polished tack, drew up in front of the Willowbrook farm. It was a city conveyance, ostentatious and utterly out of place amidst the weathered fences and sun-baked earth. Mattie Jenkins, who seemed to possess an uncanny ability to appear whenever something interesting was about to happen, materialized at the edge of the yard, her eyes wide with curiosity. The carriage door swung open with a flourish, and a man descended. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and narrow waist. His hair was slicked back, revealing a high forehead and piercing blue eyes that scanned the scene with an air of ownership. "Clara May," he called, his voice carrying across the yard like a honed blade. "There you are. I've been worried sick." Clara visibly recoiled, stepping back behind Dusty. Her hand trembled as she reached for his arm. The man, Jebediah, continued his advance, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Dusty Willowbrook, I presume? I am Jebediah Blackwood, and Clara is my fiancé. I trust she hasn't been too much trouble." Dusty felt a surge of protectiveness. "She's been no trouble at all," he said, his voice low and steady. Jebediah chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Indeed. Well, I've come to take her back. Our wedding preparations await. You understand, of course, that she cannot stay here." He gestured dismissively at the farmhouse, a clear indication of his disdain for its humble appearance. "She doesn't have to go anywhere she doesn't want to," Dusty countered, tightening his grip around Clara's trembling hand. Jebediah's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something darker. Clara, May knows her duty. Don't you, darling? He turned his attention to her, his voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that sounded utterly false. We have a life together planned, a future. This is just a silly detour. Clara's eyes darted between Dusty and Jebediah, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. She swallowed hard, then found her voice, though it wavered slightly. Jebediah, I can't. Jebediah's facade cracked completely. Can't? What do you mean you can't? His voice was sharp, laced with a barely suppressed anger. I can't marry you, Clara said, her voice gaining strength. I don't want to marry you. I never wanted to. Jebediah's face flushed crimson. He took a step toward Clara, his hand outstretched, as if to physically pull her back. Don't be absurd, Clara. You're overwrought. The country air has clearly addled your brains. Come now, let's not make a scene. Dusty stepped in front of Clara, blocking Jebediah's path. She's made her decision. You need to leave. Jebediah glared at Dusty, his eyes narrowed to slits. You presume too much, farmer. This is between Clara and me. She doesn't belong here. She belongs in the city at my side. Clara, emboldened by Dusty's presence, stepped out from behind him. I don't belong to you, Jebediah. I never did. I was afraid of you, and I ran. I won't go back. Her voice broke on the last word, but her resolve remained firm. Tears welled in her eyes. She whispered to Dusty, He's not a good man, Dusty. Please, don't let him take me back. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and desperation that solidified Dusty's resolve. Jebediah stared at Clara, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Then, a slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. Very well, Clara May. You made your choice. But don't think for a moment that this is over. I always get what I want. He turned on his heel, stalked back to the carriage, and slammed the door shut. The driver cracked the whip, and the gleaming black carriage sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Maddie Jenkins vanished as quickly as she'd appeared, undoubtedly on her way to spread the news, unveiling Jebediah's true nature. The aroma of pine needles and wood smoke usually calmed Dusty, but tonight it felt like a shroud, suffocating him in his own anxiety. He watched Clara stir the stew, her movements hesitant, almost bird-like. She'd been quieter than usual since Jebediah's explosive departure. He'd seen the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched when Jebediah's voice had boomed across the clearing. He wasn't always like that, Clara said finally, her voice barely a whisper, confirming his worst fears. She didn't meet his gaze, focusing instead on the bubbling pot. Dusty leaned against the rough-hewn wall of his cabin, his arms crossed. He seemed pretty set on having things his way. Clara sighed, a wisp of sound that seemed to carry the weight of her past. At first, he was attentive, courteous, said all the right things. She paused, her brow furrowed. He knew about the inheritance. From my aunt. Dusty's gut clenched. He'd suspected as much. Jebediah, with his fancy clothes and entitled swagger, hadn't struck him as a man interested in honest labor or genuine affection. Then, after the papers were signed, after he knew the money was as good as his things changed, she shuddered, a visible tremor running through her. He started talking about how I needed to learn to manage a household, his household, how I needed to dress differently, speak when spoken to. A memory flashed in Dusty's mind. Jebediah's hand gripping Clara's arm a little too tightly as he steered her toward his waiting buggy, his voice a low growl in her ear that Dusty couldn't quite decipher. Clara continued, her voice gaining a thread of steel. He wanted to control everything. Who I saw, what I read, even what I thought. He even tried to sell off my aunt's rare books, calling them useless old clutter. Dusty pushed himself off the wall. Did he ever hit you, Clara? The question hung in the air, thick with dread. Clara didn't answer directly. Instead, her eyes glazed over, unfocused. Clara stood in the grand parlor of Jebediah's imposing house, the air thick with the scent of expensive cigars and simmering resentment. Jebediah loomed over her, his face flushed with drink. You embarrassed me, Clara, he slurred, his words thick and clumsy. She had dared to compliment the blacksmith skill at the town fair. A simple, innocent remark. I only said he was good at his job, she protested, her voice trembling. His hand shot out, not a fist, but a hard, open palm that cracked against her cheek. The force of the blow sent her staggering. You will not praise other men in my presence, he'd snarled. You are mine now, and you will obey. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. Understand? Clara blinked, the distant look fading from her eyes. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to dislodge the memory. It doesn't matter now, she said, her voice low. I left. I got away. But Dusty could see the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. He knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in his stomach, that Jebediah wouldn't let her go so easily. The man's pride, his greed, wouldn't allow it. Dusty glanced at his reflection in the window pane. A struggling farmer, weathered and worn. What could he possibly do against a man like Jebediah Blackwood, a man with money and influence? He thought his wife, Sarah, gone these past 5 years. He remembered the fear that had gripped him when she'd fallen ill, the helplessness he'd felt as he watched her fade away. He hadn't been able to protect her then. He wouldn't fail again. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He was no match for Jebediah in wealth or power, but he had something Jebediah didn't. A stubborn streak as deep as the roots of the ancient pines that surrounded his cabin, and a fierce protectiveness for those he cared about. He looked at Clara, her face pale and drawn in the firelight. He might be just a simple farmer, but he wouldn't let Jebediah Blackwood hurt her again. He'll be back, Dusty said, his voice rough but firm. We need to be ready. The town stands together. So, the great Willow Brook deigns to play savior, offering her charity. Jebediah spat, Flex landing near Dusty's boots. His face, already a map of sun and cheap liquor, darkened to a threatening puce. He loomed, a human eclipse in the afternoon sun. She's mine, papers signed and sealed. Clara, attempting a brave face as she wrestled her few belongings from the wagon, went still. The bloom in her cheeks faded, leaving her complexion like aged parchment. A time-worn photograph of her parents was clutched in a death grip, her knuckles bone-white. Dusty held his ground, his hands, weathered by sun and soil, clenched at his sides. He'd weathered nature's worst tantrums and predatory bankers. Blackwood's bluster held no fear. She's not property, Jebediah. She's a woman, and she wants no part of you. She'll sing a different tune, Jebediah rumbled, advancing. His breath, a noxious brew of stale whiskey and decay, washed over Dusty. Once she sees your precious farm troubled, a string of unfortunate events, perhaps, crops failing, livestock vanishing, it'd be a shame if your livelihood just withered. The threat, heavy as a humid summer night, pressed down on them. Dusty's jaw locked. He knew the man's capacity for malice. The stories were legend. From the mercantile porch, Mattie Jenkins' keen eyes missed nothing. She perched her spectacles on her nose, her lips pressed into a thin, knowing line. The stage was set for a high-noon drama. This time, though, Jebediah had overstepped. She bustled inside, the bell above the door a cheerful counterpoint to the simmering tension. "Brody," she called, her voice carrying across the store. "You need to see this." Blackwood's cornered Dusty, right out front. Sheriff Brody Calhoun, lounging against the counter with a lukewarm coffee, gave little outward sign of reaction. His face, etched with time like a desert landscape, remained a study in impassivity. Only his eyes, the color of a brewing storm, narrowed imperceptibly. He set down his cup with a muffled clink and moved slowly towards the entrance. He wasn't one for hasty judgments, but Mattie's word carried weight, and he was well acquainted with Jebediah's sour disposition. Meanwhile, Mattie was orchestrating her own cavalry. Spotting a gaggle of women near the quilting fabrics, she waved them over with urgent gestures. A flurry of whispers rippled through the group. Soon, a small crowd had coalesced on the boardwalk, their faces a mix of concern and rising anger. "He's just trying to intimidate her," someone murmured. That's low. Even for him, another added. Dusty ignored Jebediah, focusing on Clara. You all right? He asked, his voice a low rumble of concern. Clara nodded, though fear still flickered in her eyes. Straightening her spine, she found a spark of defiance. I am now. She stepped closer, her hand finding purchase on Dusty's arm. He won't break me. Jebediah scoffed, dismissing her. Pride always comes before a fall. But as he spoke, the crowd's murmur swelled. Maddie's seeds of dissent had sprouted. One by one, residents descended from the boardwalk, forming a silent bulwark between Jebediah and the pair. Old Man Hemlock, his cane his only ally, stood at the fore. Behind him were Mrs. Abernathy, her apron still dusted with flour, and young Thomas, the blacksmith's apprentice, wiping his brow with a soot-stained rag. Then came the farmers, the ranchers, the shopkeepers, a united front of grim faces. Sheriff Brody reached the fringe of the gathering, his presence a subtle, calming influence. He observed, his hand resting near the grip of his revolver. Unobtrusive, yet a clear sign. He was there, and he was vigilant. Maddie stepped forward, her voice sharp and clear as a struck bell. Jebediah Blackwood, you've crossed a line. We don't tolerate bullies in Harmony Creek. Clara May is our guest, and Dusty Willowbrook is an honest man. Leave them both in peace. A wave of assent surged through the crowd. Jebediah, momentarily silenced by the unexpected uprising, sputtered in indignation. He scanned the faces, seeking an ally, but found only condemnation. He was surrounded, outmaneuvered, his authority dismantled. He shot a final glare at Dusty, his eyes burning with venom. This isn't finished, Willowbrook, he seethed. Then, with a frustrated bellow, he spun on his heel and vanished down the dusty road, leaving behind a miasma of resentment and the palpable understanding that, for today, the town stood as one. Exposing the deceit, the air in the town square crackled, thick with anticipation. Clara, clutching a worn ledger, stood on the makeshift stage usually reserved for the traveling medicine show. Her face, pale but resolute, was illuminated by the afternoon sun. Across from her, Jebediah Blackwood stood with his arms crossed, a sneer plastered on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dusty Willowbrook was at Clara's side, his jaw set, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. I know many of you trusted Jebediah, Clara began, her voice trembling only slightly. I did too at first, but I've come to learn some disconcerting truths. She opened the ledger. The leather creaked like an old man's bones. This book contains detailed records of the town's investments. Specifically, the investments Jebediah convinced many of you to make in his expanding lumber operation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Maddie Jenkins, perched on the edge of the mercantile's porch, leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with morbid curiosity. Sheriff Brody Calhoun, leaning against the hitching post, straightened up, his gaze fixed on Jebediah. Clara flipped a page. See here? Mr. Abernathy's life savings, invested for a guaranteed 10% return. Except, Mr. Abernathy, that money wasn't invested in lumber. It was used to purchase a rather extravagant carriage for Mr. Blackwood's personal use. A gasp went through the crowd. Mr. Abernathy, a frail man with a perpetually worried expression, wrung his hands. That can't be, he swore. Clara continued, turning pages, each revelation a fresh wound. Mrs. Henderson's contribution, used to pay off Jebediah's gambling debts in Carson City. A flush crept up Mrs. Henderson's neck, her bonnet casting her face in shadow. Jebediah finally found his voice, thick with forced indignation. These are lies. Fabrications. This woman is a con artist. Come here to defame me. He took a step toward Clara, his hand raised. Dusty stepped in front of Clara, his eyes blazing. Don't you touch her, Jebediah. He didn't raise his voice, but the quiet menace was more effective than a shout. We've all seen your fancy clothes, your new horses, things that don't quite add up on a lumberman's salary. The crowd shifted, their gazes turning from Clara to Jebediah, suspicion replacing their earlier trust. This ledger, Clara said, holding it up, was meticulously kept by Jebediah himself. He was so confident in his scheme, he didn't even bother to hide the evidence. She met Jebediah's gaze head-on. I found it locked away in his office. He wouldn't have wanted me to see it, of course, but I did. Jebediah's face contorted with rage. You meddling! He lunged, but Dusty intercepted him, grabbing his arm and shoving him back. The truth is out, Jebediah, Dusty said, his voice low and dangerous. You can't hide from it anymore. The murmur of the crowd swelled into a roar. Accusations were hurled, questions demanded. Jebediah's face was now a mask of crimson fury and fear. He looked around at the faces that were once friendly, now filled with anger and contempt. His carefully constructed facade crumbled before their eyes. Sheriff Calhoun stepped forward, placing a hand on Jebediah's shoulder. Looks like we've got some questions for you, Jebediah. As the sheriff led a sputtering Jebediah away, the crowd surged forward, surrounding Clara and Dusty. Mr. Abernathy, his eyes filled with tears, grasped Clara's hand. Thank you, child. Thank you for exposing him. Clara squeezed his hand. I just wanted to do what's right. She looked up at Dusty, a small smile playing on her lips. The sun seemed to catch the gold in her hair, turning it into a halo. The town was no longer united under Jebediah's banner of lies, but there was a different kind of unity now, forged in truth and tempered by anger. And Clara, the mail-order bride who arrived unwanted, had become its unlikely champion. Justice in Harmony Creek. Get in the buggy, Clara May, Jebediah snarled, his face floored with rage. He lunged, grabbing her arm with surprising force. His grip was like a vice, and she gasped, a small sound lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. Dusty, who had been leaning against his wagon, straightened instantly. His eyes, usually the color of a summer sky, darkened to the shade of a brewing storm. He moved with a speed that belied his lanky frame, stepping between Jebediah and Clara. Let her go, Blackwood. Jebediah's face contorted further. She's mine. I paid good money for her. He tugged harder on Clara's arm, ignoring Dusty's presence. Clara, despite her fear, stood her ground. I am no one's property, Mr. Blackwood, least of all yours. She tried to pry his fingers loose, but his grip only tightened. The murmur of the crowd escalated into a chorus of angry voices. Mrs. Gable, her spectacles perched precariously on her nose, brandished her umbrella like a weapon. Leave the girl alone, you bully, she shrieked. Even timid Mr. Abernathy, the town librarian, stood taller, his spectacles glinting in the afternoon sun. Don't make me do something you'll regret, Jebediah, Dusty warned, his voice low and dangerous. He kept his gaze locked on Jebediah's, his body coiled like a spring. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Jebediah ignored him. He yanked Clara forward, attempting to drag her toward a waiting, dusty buggy. You're coming with me, girl, whether you like it or not. That was the last straw. Dusty grabbed Jebediah's wrist, his fingers digging into the older man's flesh. I said, let her go. With a swift, practiced movement, he twisted Jebediah's arm behind his back. Jebediah howled in pain, his face turning an even deeper shade of purple. He released Clara's arm, stumbling forward. Clara rubbed her wrist, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She looked at Dusty, a silent thank you passing between them. The crowd surged forward, surrounding Jebediah. A cacophony of angry shouts filled the air. Thief! Fraud! Get him out of Harmony Creek! Sheriff Brody Calhoun, his face grim, pushed his way through the throng. He surveyed the scene, his eyes taking in Jebediah's disheveled appearance, Dusty's protective stance, and Clara's pale face. All right, settle down, Brody commanded, his voice booming across the square. The crowd quieted slightly, their attention focused on the sheriff. Brody approached Jebediah, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Jebediah Blackwood, I'm placing you under arrest. Jebediah spluttered. For what? Assault? That Willowbrook boy attacked me. Assault? No, Jebediah, Brody said, his voice hard. For fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying land deeds. Seems your little scheme to swindle the townsfolk out of their land is about to come to an end. He gestured to a stack of papers held by a deputy nearby. We have the evidence. The crowd erupted again, this time with cheers. Mrs. Gable swung her umbrella triumphantly. Even Mr. Abernathy cracked a small smile. Brody produced a pair of handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence. He secured Jebediah's wrists, the metal glinting in the sunlight. As Brody led Jebediah away, the crowd parted, their faces a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Some spat on the ground near Jebediah's feet. Others hurled insults. Jebediah, his head bowed, shuffled along, his bravado gone. He glanced at Clara, his eyes filled with venom. "This ain't over, girl," he muttered. "You'll regret this." Clara met his gaze, her chin held high. "No, Mr. Blackwood, you're the one who will regret this." Dusty stepped closer to Clara, his hand resting protectively on her back. He watched as Sheriff Brody escorted Jebediah into the jailhouse, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. The air still vibrated with the tension of the confrontation, but a sense of relief washed over Harmony Creek. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. The sounds of the town began to return. Horses shifting, people chattering, the squeak of a wagon wheel. But Clara's heart beat faster than any of them. A new beginning. The dust, kicked up by Jebediah's hasty departure, still hung in the air, a gritty reminder of the man's malevolence. Clara brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, her gaze fixed on the empty road. The silence felt heavy, a stark contrast to the shouting that had filled the town square just moments before. "He's really gone, then?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dusty placed a hand on her arm, his touch sending a comforting warmth through her. "He won't be back, Clara May. Not ever." He squeezed gently. Sheriff Calhoun made sure of that. She turned to him, her eyes, no longer clouded with fear, shining with a newfound light. I don't know how to thank you, Dusty. You risked everything for me." He shrugged, a familiar gesture of humility that Clara was beginning to adore. "You're worth risking everything for." The words hung in the air between them, unspoken truths finally given voice. Clara's cheeks flushed. "I came here thinking I had no choice. But now," she took a deep breath, "now I can't imagine being anywhere else, or with anyone else." She reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the lines etched there by the sun and worry. "You showed me kindness I never thought existed. You made me feel safe. You saved me, Dusty Willowbrook." Dusty's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd been a fool to think he could live the rest of his life alone, haunted by the memory of Sarah. Clara was a breath of fresh air, a sunrise after a long, dark night. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her soft skin. "Clara May," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you do me the greatest honor a man can ask? Will you be my wife?" He hadn't planned on proposing this way, not amidst the aftermath of Jebediah's ugliness, but the words tumbled out, driven by a force he couldn't deny. Clara's eyes widened, tears welling up. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Dusty, 1,000 times yes." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of wildflowers and sunshine that clung to her. He held her tightly, afraid to let go, afraid that this moment, this perfect, fragile thing, would vanish like a dream. From the porch of the general store, Maddie Jenkins watched the scene unfold, a knowing smile playing on her lips. She'd seen the way Dusty looked at Clara, the way Clara's eyes lit up whenever Dusty was near. It was a love story written in shy glances and shared smiles, a love story the whole town had been waiting for. She bustled inside, her voice booming. "Did you all see that? Dusty Willowbrook just proposed to Miss Clara. We got a wedding to plan." The news spread like wildfire through Harmony Creek. Within minutes, the town square was bustling with activity once more, but this time, the atmosphere was celebratory. Women emerged from their homes, armed with baskets of flowers and bolts of fabric. Men gathered, discussing plans for a barn dance and a feast fit for a king. Sheriff Calhoun, a rare smile gracing his weathered face, clapped Dusty on the back. "Congratulations, son," he said. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Clara, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, clung to Dusty's arm. "I can't believe it," she murmured. "Everyone is so kind." "This is Harmony Creek, Clara May," Dusty said, his voice filled with pride. "We take care of our own." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the town, Dusty and Clara stood hand in hand, surrounded by the warm embrace of their newfound community. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and the promise of a brighter future. The darkness Jebediah had brought had been banished, replaced by a light that shone brighter than ever before. A new beginning had dawned in Harmony Creek, a beginning born of love, courage, and the unwavering spirit of a small town.